Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Phil and I hanging out once again talking about all these things we do each and every week here on the show, really going through the stuff of retirement. And this week it's guessing. Probably not a good idea, Phil, to guess at retirement.
Not something I'd be guessing at. Yeah. So going good.
So we've got some important questions, and where guessing can kind of go pretty wrong, really. Mm-hmm. And in these times, Phil, who wants to guess? I think since the last time we talked, we got the official numbers. I'm not sure if we did last week or not, but it was 7.9% inflation. Saw a thing this morning at the time that we're taping this podcast that they're saying we're probably going to see 10 by the end of the year. Crazy.
With gas prices the way they're going, and still the supply shortages, and I wouldn't be surprised, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. There's so many similarities to the 70s. It's pretty eerie, right? The late 70s, mid 70s, when we were going through, the gas shortages, the issues then. We had antagonized OPEC or whatever.
Right.
But, different reasons, but the same thing, high inflation. The Fed's talking about ticking up the inflation rate or the
interest rates. And
it went to some crazy numbers, so if you didn't live through it, you don't know what we're talking about. I was too young to care, like we talked about before, but still the similarities keep stacking up. It's very strange.
Yeah, they do. I mean, in talking to clients that had lived through that, back in the day, had mortgage rates at double digits, they thought they were getting a great rate at 13, and we're complaining now because they're near 4.
And interest rates got up to like 18%, I think 19%.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if we'll go that crazy, but it looks like they're almost following the same game plan as the Fed chairman did back then, which is to kind of break the back of inflation by ticking this stuff up. Now, I don't know if they're going to go that far to start with, but I guess the conversation becomes, Phil, if we're not in a recession, will it put us in one? Right?
Right. Yeah. And that's some of the concern of, does this just add one more
wrinkle
stack on top of everything else that, is already pressing hard on the economy. So exactly. Absolutely.
Well, let's jump into these questions, that we shouldn't be guessing at. I'm going to shift the order, Phil, since we were talking about this. I'm going to start with inflation, which was actually third on my list, but I'm going to make it first because we recognize it now, right? We're awake to it.
Yes.
As we've talked about for a number of weeks, whether it's the market being great the last several years and we go to sleep on the fact that it cannot be great, or if we, think about inflation as just, it's just there. I know it's back there, but whatever. Well, now you're really aware, right? So let's look at this from a standpoint, little back of the napkin math, if you will, on the show for this week. So $5,000, you're guessing at retirement, your $5,000 a month gets us there. That's what we need on our income to live.
Right.
Well, under normal inflationary periods, Phil, we're talking 10,000. It'll double in what, 15 years, 18 years?
15 years. Like yep.
So what are you doing? Are you guessing?
Yeah. I mean, you've got to, number one, have inflation built into the plan. I mean, that's the first mistake I see people look at is that, well, it's been so low, we don't have to worry about it, or market returns will keep up with inflation. I'm not, let's just ignore it.
And that's
yeah, I mean, the case, the markets have way outperformed inflation until recently.
Right.
But you can't ignore inflation. And probably the biggest risk you have when you have inflation is that fixed income. Right. Okay. And I think there's been a lot of people with pensions, that fixed income that, they've been okay the last 10 years because inflation's been relatively low. And their pensions stayed pretty consistent, but the gap hasn't widened that much.
Because most pensions don't have COLAs. They don't have cost of living adjustment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Typically it's governmental, some nonprofit, hospitals, things like that might have some kind of COLA or cost of living adjustment. Yeah. But most for-profit companies, they don't have cost of living adjustments. I mean, it's going to be a level income.
Yeah. So
Social Security, I mean, it's never meant to keep up with inflation, but at least it goes a long way. I mean, which I mean, this year was a tell of that. I mean, we got 5.9% on, and that was based on last year's inflation. That wasn't even looking at, so who knows what next year's cost of living is going to be from Social Security. But it helps. It helps. Right. So.
Yeah. So if you're guessing at this, and again, this is where our conversation is this week. So if you're feeling like, and you'll see that these tie together, folks. So even though I moved the order, we're going to go back to income here in a second. But if you're guessing at your income needs in retirement, and then you're guessing at inflation needs in retirement, you're going to be in for a rude awakening further down the line in retirement, right? So you go 20 years through this, you're looking at double the amount of expenses that it cost you originally. So even if if you feel like you're being smart and you go, well, we need $5,000 a month to live on now, so we'll kick that up to $6,000 or $6,500, and over the next couple of years, you're still way underperforming what you're going to need, because it's going to double just the normal inflation. Like I said earlier, double, right?
Yeah, I mean, in our plans, we have been historically using around 2.7%. I mean, that was the 20-year historical average,
right?
And in a 20-year plan, that number doubled. I mean, it's just crazy to look at just that small effect of it. But inflation is one of those things you need it in the plan. I don't get too caught up with what it is today and the crazy numbers, because the reality is,
hopefully that's
number one is short-lived, right? I mean, and you have to build in inflation into the plan, but the reality is the real difference is going to be what we call the real return. Right? Because inflation, we already touched on it briefly, that inflation's back in the 70s, 80s was high, but what else was high? Earnings, right? I mean, look at the bank. What did you get at the bank back then? I mean, you could earn 9-10% in the bank. So that relationship typically follows, so you don't have to build in a 7% inflation in the plan. And only a 5% return because you're being conservative, because that's not realistic either.
Okay. All right.
You've got to make sure you're looking at both sides of the equation. So to me, it's not so much the inflation number. It's that real return you're looking at of, how much do you anticipate your plan is going to beat inflation? Transitionary years like this, that never happens, right? I mean, inflation is taken off. Yeah. You're not going to see returns follow inflation in years like this, longer periods of time. That's what you have to look at.
Okay.
So,
all right. And again, it's a little easier for you, doing this every day to kind of step back. And that's why we're kind of sharing these things. But for a lot of us, we just, we wig out, right? So, and we kind of look away. Well, if I don't look at it, it won't happen. So that's typically, kind of the way we view it. So,
yeah. So to me, the biggest takeaway with this is, number one, making sure you're accounting for inflation in your plan, and have investments geared to help keep up with that, especially if your primary source of income is some kind of fixed income.
Okay.
It's going to unfortunately affect you much more than other people, because you've got a fixed income. It is what it is. Yeah. As rates rise, your costs are going to go up, but your income is going to stay the same. So you better have some other assets, hopefully, that can help bridge that gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
we talk about the COLAs, and I've said it before on the show, and I've given my mom credit for it. And I was telling her the other day, the power went out with those storms that we had come across a big chunk of the country on the East Coast side. And so I had to bring her over here because it got really cold. It's been in the 60s and 70s, but then it dropped back down. Anyway, so I brought her over. Now I was telling her about the COLA, and she referred to it, typically the Social Security COLA adjustments, as a diet COLA, because they don't.
That's right.
Much. And she's like, when did I say that? She totally forgot. So I had to remind her. And then she's like, oh, yeah, that was pretty smart. So anyway, let's go back to the first one then, which was the guessing at the income portion. Okay. And that's really kind of the thing that a lot of us do. If we don't want to go see an advisor, we don't put a plan together, we think, I've got this, I'm DIYing it, whatever. Mm-hmm. We tend to guess at the income needs in retirement based off typically what we were making. I think is probably where we go. So again, I'm using that $5,000. That's just an easy number because it's easy to
right.
math on. But if you're guessing and saying, okay, babe, we need $5,000 a month to live on now as a husband and wife, right? You're talking to each other, and that should be fine going into retirement, because that's getting it done now, and we're getting close to retirement or whatever that looks like. Again, why are you guessing at this when it's so easy to find out? Because there's two ways of looking at this, Phil. What if you guess short, right?
Right.
Now you don't have the quality of life that you wanted to in
Yep.
retirement. Or if you guess that's too high and you spend a number of years working or whatever to get to the said number, and you could have
Yep.
retired 3 years earlier. However you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a balancing act. I mean, unfortunately, I see more people guessing too low.
Too low, yeah.
You know, and I mean, even when we teach our class, we hand out a budget worksheet, we call it, that, you know, goes through the various expense items and is meant to help you start to put together that budget, or, you know, the number of what you think you might need in retirement. It's an interesting exercise, but 99% of the time you're going to underestimate. We all do. We don't realize what we spend. You know, you think of, okay, start adding up, well, I got the utilities and I got this and this and this and this. Well, yeah, that's only like $5,000 a month, you know.
That's the big ticket items, right?
You know, but yeah, then it's all the extra little things. Look at Amazon. How many packages come to your house a day or a week? You know, I mean, did you build that in?
You know, a side note, Phil, I was thinking about this, watching the sheer amount of packages that must go back and forth and buy some return. It's got to be out of control. But anyway,
but that's why they do what they do. So,
but to your point, though, how much do we do?
Right. So the exercise we always walk through with clients is, I mean, number one, most clients, as you get to retirement, you want to maintain a standard of living that you've been used to, right? So you don't go into retirement all of a sudden spend significantly less. Granted, there are certain things, right? So you got 2 cars, maybe you might go back to 1 because you don't, you know, you're both not going to work, you know.
Right.
So there are some things, you know, your clothing might change, you know, especially if you wear suits or something high, you know, more expensive for work.
Right.
If you've got college education, certain things like that. But at the end of the day, the rest of the numbers are probably going to be pretty consistent. In fact, they might even go up because now you've got more time.
Yeah, you're partying.
You got hobbies and you know, all these things that you've wanted to do that you didn't have time to do. So the exercise we always walk through is, let's look at the tax return and figure out, okay, your tax return, you earned X amount minus the taxes you paid. So minus your, you know, federal, your state, your Social Security and Medicare. So here's the net number. This is how much net income you generated last year. Where did it go?
Yeah.
It went one of 2 places. You either you saved it or you spent it.
It went to Amazon.
Yeah, and exactly. Unless you can specifically say, well, I put it in, you know, this account or this investment, and I haven't touched it, you know. So we're not talking about, well, I put $500 a month over here for my escrow account that I pay property taxes on, because that's an expense. You're spending it. So, you know, well, yeah, this is great. Oh, we can retire now. But if you get there and the reality is, well, we're spending 7, well, that's another scenario. It's like 20% higher.
Yeah.
You know,
and then you got to take that out over the years that you retire, 20%. So you got to extrapolate that out. So it gets pretty messy. And the silly part about the guessing really is, folks, is that you don't have to. I mean, most of the time, you know, and it's not just with Phil, it's wherever you live. If you're listening to this or watching this, you can go sit down with an advisor just about anywhere, and they're going to do those consultations initially.
Right.
There's no cost, right? Typically they're all do it for no cost or obligation. So find out, get some more, you know, hard data, if you will, versus just guessing. So let's move it along here, Phil. We'll go to the next one. So I was talking about inflation. Let's talk about like the purchasing things. Again, we'll go with regular inflation as just a kind of the thought, not necessarily. And then you could just say, well, now it's even worse, especially if you're walking into retirement. But where do you stand on the emergency fund versus major purchases in retirement? Some advisors or some people kind of blur those 2 lines. Like, you've got your emergency fund if the roof flew off in a storm. Okay,
right.
Fine. But what about planning to replace the AC unit? Because, you know, like, it's 30 years old. Do you put that in
so there's some
fund, or did you plan for it because you know it's coming?
Right. Personally, our approach is we're either planning for it, or I make sure that there's enough room in that budget or in the plan overall. So, I mean, when we're planning for retirement like that, I'm never spending down to zero, you know? So a plan just barely works to me if, based on all the math, we've got 5 years left. So if I'm, you know, saying somebody's going to live till 90, they have at least enough money to make it to 95. So we've got a little bit of cushion in there, you know, so that is where some of that comes into play. But I mean, to your point, if there are some known larger expenses, you know, so some clients' cars, you know, they don't lease them, they want to buy a car. So we'll put a car purchase in every 3-5 years, whatever their number is.
Right. Yeah.
These larger expenses. I've got a lot of clients I work with that as they're kind of bridge or nearing retirement, they're spending a lot of extra money up front doing those big items, right? So they're replacing the furnace, they've done the windows, all the big ticket items,
getting ready.
They've taken care of getting ready for retirement.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, you can drive yourself crazy if you're trying to nitpick and put every little piece into the plan, but yet you've got to think through some of it.
Yeah.
Right. And make sure there's enough. Yeah. Make sure there's enough wiggle room, so to speak, in the plan to accommodate some of that. Yeah. So
I'm with you on that, because I've been doing that myself. Turning 50, I've been doing things to the house for the last couple of years. We plan on dying here. So I've been doing little things so that I while I'm working, so that I don't have to necessarily worry about those things in retirement. But the downside is, Phil, maybe I started them too early, right? So you can't.
So you're going to hit the end of retirement. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm doing them at 50, and then I might get to like 75, and it's like, oh, the AC units, because it was 25 years ago when I replaced them all or whatever. I will say this though, we all know they don't make things like they used to. Knock on wood. I have my upstairs. My daughter's, since she's no longer home, there's nobody ever up there, so we barely have it just kick on in really low temperatures, kick on in really high temperatures. But that thing is 37 years old. It's a 37-year-old train that still gets it done, knock on wood.
Yeah.
And I'm terrified to change it, because I know the next one I put in there will probably last like 10 years.
That's right. Even though it costs twice as much. So
and this thing's like a tank. So I'm just like, keep doing your thing. But anyway, all right. So the final one here, Phil, healthcare costs, guessing at it.
The normal medical cost in retirement. Your cost of Medicare supplements, those kind of things. I mean, that's a pretty known number. We know what they are today. Personally, when we're projecting it, I'm always putting in the highest plan. So we're using like a plan G today that's covering basically everything that's out of pocket. So we're eliminating that unknown of out of pockets.
Okay.
Putting those premiums in. Then the other side of it, we're going to assume double whatever the inflation is. So if we're using, 2.5% inflation on everything else, I'm going to assume 5% on medical.
Right. Yeah.
Just because medical, like education, like so many other things, have, significantly higher inflation numbers.
Yeah.
So personally, I mean, that's how we handle it is, number one, don't ignore it, put it in there, understand it, run the math on your scenario, your state where you live. What does it cost? What's it going to cost me for Medicare Part B, for a supplement, for my prescription drug, all the different components. I'd encourage you to estimate on the high side. So take the plan that is you want to think about the Cadillac plan to eliminate that unknown of deductibles and run with that. So, and then the other side of it's long-term care. Yep. You've got to us, that's a stress test. I mean, I never put it into everyone's plan as a base plan and let's make sure, it's in there to work. We make sure the plan works to begin with, but then we stress test it to say, if that happens, long-term care happens, what does it look like? Does the plan still work? If not, then let's start to look at, either some kind of long-term care insurance or setting up some kind of a self-funding of that care. So.
Yeah, and a guessing game gets more complicated, certainly in that area as well. So,
yes.
But again, at the end of the day, all of this stuff can be addressed by just simply sitting down with a professional and getting a plan put together. So if you got some questions, folks, why guess? I mean, the industry is there. Reach out, get started, have a conversation. If you need some help, stop by and talk with Phil if you'd like to. Go to philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. You can find all the information, link back to his main page. You can subscribe to us on Apple, Google, Spotify, all that stuff I say every week. The number's on the screen for if you'd like to reach out, but it's 248-888-7530 if you're not watching, 248-888-7530. So get on the calendar, have a conversation with Phil, or if not Phil, definitely talk with an advisor, and don't guess at retirement. Phil, my friend, thanks for hanging out.
No problem. Take care.
See you next time, and we'll talk to you soon here on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.